coming. I want to review a little bit of the marketing questions, and then of course the rules of the road for here, and then introduce our speaker, Jessica Vaughan, whom most of you know, and let her talk about stop the surge of illegal aliens before it's too late. It's a serious business, and we have a quick video for you all to dramatize the seriousness of all that. So I hope you'll pay attention to that when it comes. So to start, and then we have a petition after the break, quick break sort of toward the end, a petition for a comic floor to Charlie Baker to put the kibosh on the common core. We'll talk about that a little bit later, I think. So, how many of you, let's see, have heard about this meeting through the radio? Anybody? There's one. And how many from a friend who's related to it? Yeah, friend. Email, Northborough Tea Party. Well, the email is really getting around. Remember? Direct email is not yet dead, I hear, in the annals of marketing. And town TV, anybody new here tonight? Great. And the regulars, you're new. Thank you for coming, sir. Appreciate that. Now, as you who've been here before understand, our discourse is civil. We show mutual respect to everyone, both in words and in the tone which those words leave our mouths. And we try to be prompt, and we're going to leave kind of around 8:30, but we can probably extend that a few more minutes. And now I want to let you know a little bit more about Jessica Vaughan. How many of you have not heard Jessica Vaughan speak in the past? Quite a few, okay, well, that's good. She's been doing this kind of work about immigration and studies for over 20 years, and did a TV show, testimonies and congressional testimony, and done a lot of hard work for the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington, D.C. But in spite of all that, I want to let you know that she still has a life. So she grew up in Baltimore, so she's used to trouble. She lives in D.C., so, she used to faker. She knows a faker when she sees one. She spent a lot of time in Brussels, Belgium, with the State Department, so she knows, where she's being taken advantage of when the country is. And still with all of that as a family woman, 4 children, 2 in college, psychology and business management, and 2 younger ones. Oh, by the way, the one who's in college will welcome any job offers for the summer. And the younger one's scratch golfer, going to become a golf pro, and then theater and cooking. Well, what a family. Can we all go over for dinner sometime and watch the athletics and then eat well? Now, of course, she is a competitive tennis player, so she's fast on her feet in addition to all these other abilities. So she's the director of studies for the Center of Immigration Studies, and knows a lot about the inside workings of the government, as well as the issues down along the border and so on. And I want you to know that this is all good for us. It's good for us in this group. Better for us. We have more information, more insight than other groups do around the country or in Massachusetts. So we're lucky and fortunate she lives nearby and is able to help us with these insights. So we are more effective, therefore, in any of the activities that we do in behalf of proper immigration. We can be much more effective and pointed and stronger thereby. So what I suggest then is that we let Jessica talk about the topic she's going to address, and welcome her again to the Northborough Tea Party.
Thank you so much. I think that was the nicest introduction I've ever had.
Oh, my.
But tonight. It is important to be educated on the issues before you undertake activism, because that is so much more effective and so much more convincing to the opinion leaders and especially the lawmakers that you are trying to communicate with. They are so overwhelmed with information. You can never assume that they will have had the chance to become educated on an issue themselves. And I know a lot of you have found that out on other issues like Common Core and some other things. While Massachusetts is most definitely an attractive place that many people coming here illegally or staying here illegally are seeking out, you know that from government intelligence reports, I believe there's a reason why Massachusetts does not have the same policies as California or Connecticut or even Maryland, certainly not Illinois. And I believe that's because there are people like you who have been active and been able to prevent some of the worst policies from taking effect. And that's a tribute to you all and the causes that you've been involved in and the work that you've done and the reading that you've done to be able to communicate this in an articulate way. Very, very effective. Tonight I wanted to focus on three different things. I wanted to bring you up to date. A lot of people have been interested in the status of the President's executive actions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and spend a little bit more time on something that has always been out there as an immigration issue that most people have not realized is an immigration issue. It's been dormant for a long time, but it has come to the forefront of issues, and that is a matter of trade agreements, which I know a lot of people are like, what does this have to do with immigration? And I will definitely explain that. But that's, I just want to spend a few minutes, first of all, on the lawsuit in Massachusetts. Last week, there were arguments before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, a panel of 3 judges who were considering a request by the Obama administration to lift an injunction that one of the Fifth Circuit federal judges had imposed to block the president's actions that were announced in November to give amnesty to about 5 or 6 million people living here illegally, and there were about 12 executive actions that were part of this. But the judge issued an injunction because 26 states around the country sued the federal government and said, you can't do that, essentially. I mean, the president has been acting with his pen and phone very vigorously for a couple of years now, and finally, a group of states got together and made a persuasive case that the judge said, yeah, we've got to hold, this has got to, the constitutionality and the process here have to be considered. And so they put that injunction on hold. I listened to the arguments. Often what was happening last week was that the Obama administration was asking this panel of judges to hear their request to lift the judge's injunction against the executive actions, saying that, and they made basically 2 arguments. They said that the president that has the right to do what he announced he would do because it is simply an exercise of what they call prosecutorial discretion. In other words, a police officer has the authority not to issue a ticket if you're caught speeding. You can give a warning, and you can say, I'm not going to give you a ticket this time. Or if somebody's shoplifting, say, I'm not going to arrest you this time. And that's this grant of amnesty to 5 or 6 million people living here illegally is nothing more than that. Of course, that's a flawed analogy because even if a police officer doesn't give someone a speeding ticket, he doesn't also give them permission to speed, which is what the president's executive action did. But even more interestingly, as I was listening to the arguments that were webcast, the president's lawyers from the Department of Justice injunction should be lifted because the Department of Homeland Security can't do its job to enforce the law unless they're allowed to give out 5 to 6 million work permits to people so that ICE agents can tell who they should deport and who they should not deport. And that it is actually necessary for them to have these work permits so that we would know who the illegal aliens are. Well, of course, what has come to light recently, especially today, is that the President's previous executive amnesty, DACA, Deferred Action for Trials and Rivals for the Dreamers, they don't know who those people are either. We've learned today at the Senate Judiciary Committee held an oversight hearing and reported that the President's administration has given amnesty already to 282 people who have known criminal gang affiliations. And so far, one of them has already been charged with the murder of 4 people in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I would suggest that amnesty policy isn't doing a very good job of weeding out all the criminal aliens, and certainly not assisting with public safety. So I have a feeling these arguments are going to fall flat. Maybe not for that reason, but that reason fell flat with me. The 26 states, on the other hand, are saying this is not prosecutorial discretion. You're giving out work permits. You're abdicating the executive responsibility to faithfully execute the laws as passed by Congress. And we deserve, as states who are affected by this, because we have to accommodate and provide social services to all of these millions of people who will suddenly become eligible for all kinds of public benefits that U.S. citizens and legal immigrants are getting, have no voice in this. And immigration is administrative laws, and there's a procedure to be followed, and the Obama administration ignored it. And that actually was the major reason that the judge issued the injunction in the first place, is because they hadn't asked for any notice and comment before the rules were put in place. And finally, the states argued that it's a very costly proposition for them, as I just said. So the news media are trying to portray this as one cranky judge in Texas who is halting the Obama administration's great initiative that will keep us safe. But really, it's the fact that 26 states got together and took it upon themselves to bring this lawsuit and make very credible legal arguments about the unconstitutionality of this initiative. Of course, our state is not one of those, even though we are certainly going to be affected by it. On the contrary, our Attorney General, Maura Healey, filed an amicus brief in support of the President's action, saying that it would benefit our state if all these people were to be issued amnesty. But our governor has not joined the lawsuit. Last week, the House of Representatives, the Democrats, passed a resolution in support of the President's amnesty. There was one member of the Massachusetts delegation who did not sign it. Does anybody know who that is?
Lynch.
Oh, Stephen Lynch.
Stephen Lynch. It's the only one of the Massachusetts delegation.
Democrat delegation.
Well, that's what we have.
Yes, we got.
No, but none of the Republicans signed on, right?
Well, no, we're talking about the U.S. Congress.
Yeah.
Federal representatives. He's the only one who appears to have some level of discomfort with what the President is trying to do. He's not willing to put his name on that. My best guess is that the panel of judges will not be inclined to side with the Obama administration and lift the block on this executive action. I'm told that it is very, and all this has to do with because they are generally loath to do anything that will change the status quo while this case is pending on the constitutionality grounds. And that they have said that they know that the Obama administration is not deporting people anyway. So there seems to be no reason to let this huge expansion of amnesty go forward when there's a question about the constitutionality of it. The next thing that's going maybe up to the Supreme Court, and this is going to play out at least until next year at this time. Most people see probably even longer than that. So that's a good thing.
Right.
That this administration has been blocked from this massive executive action. That's the good news. So we can thank those 26 states. The bad news is that the president continues almost on a weekly basis to make new changes in immigration law that are outrageous, unprecedented, costly, and increasing illegal immigration. One of them is, remember the surge of Central Americans last year? The administration has said that it doesn't want a repeat of that, so instead they've started a refugee program in Central America to allow illegal alien parents here to ask for refugee status for any children that they left behind. At the same time, expanding the definition of what a refugee is and expanding the range of services that are provided to them. And just last night, they issued an action saying that if any of these kids, once they get here, there's a special status that Congress created, which was intended for abandoned or abused kids who were found here illegally, which there have always been just a few. But now the immigration lawyers have figured out how to get state courts to declare any kids who had difficult lives to be wards of the state. Some of you may remember there was a bill in our state legislature last year that was defeated, not approved, that would have limited the age at which they could apply for these visas. Last night, the Obama administration announced that as long as these kids get their applications in before they're age 21, no matter how long it takes to adjudicate their cases, they will still give them the green cards. So that was just last night. A couple weeks ago, they decided to offer work permits to the spouses of guest workers. And for that, they're also pressing to expand the admission of Syrian refugees to come here. So this is, I tell you, it literally is every week there's something. And Congress is having trouble keeping up with it. But this is why, we've got 2 more years of this at least. Massachusetts needs to take action. We at least need to do what we can in our state to reduce the incentives for people to choose Massachusetts as opposed to, say, California or Illinois or somewhere like that, or maybe just not come at all. Governor Baker, I believe, has the right instincts, at least with respect to illegal immigration, and has made some very positive and constructive statements about what he would like the policies to be. And he's got some things to undo, too, from the previous administration. But he has been silent so far. He's talked about reforming the registry, which is critically important, because that Massachusetts driver's license is the gateway to everything else. But there is more they could do. He's named a new registrar, but the old registrar, I'm told, is still in a consulting role at the registry. I believe that he'll eventually move to bring Massachusetts into compliance with Real ID. But we haven't really seen any progress towards that yet. He could do a lot of things by executive action, for example, verifying the Social Security numbers of people who apply for licenses and a few other things. But we haven't seen any movement in that direction yet. He could implement E-Verify for state agencies and contractors. And he could undo Deval Patrick's policies that were hostile to secure communities and essentially tried to sabotage federal immigration enforcement efforts, especially with respect to criminals. I suspect that those probably will go. And maybe it's just, they may have happened already, but one of the most important areas that is badly in need of attention at the state level is the issue of providing social service benefits to people who are here illegally. And these are benefits that are not required by federal law. I'm not talking about emergency health care or most notorious benefit that illegal aliens can get here, and people with this quasi status that the president keeps giving people, is public housing benefits. And possibly this afternoon, one state rep, Shauna O'Connell from Taunton, introduced an amendment to budget resolution that would change policy so that every applicant for public housing benefits in the state would have to demonstrate the same eligibility that you have to do for federal public housing programs, and that is you have to have a social security number or show that you have legal status. It's a very common sense thing, and really, it's like, why aren't we doing this already? But we know that we are, we've got Anthony Zatuni, everybody's familiar with that case. And Massachusetts, as a matter of state policy, has been providing public housing benefits. In the meantime, seniors, veterans, disabled people are closed out of these programs, which are scarce. If ever there was a zero-sum game situation with respect to providing benefits, public housing is one of them. There's so many dollars to go around, so many places where people can go. And so U.S. citizens should have priority here, followed by legal immigrants who've been here for some time. Under federal law, even legal immigrants can't get these benefits until they've had a green card for 5 years. But not so with our policy here in the state. So when this amendment became public, the main immigrants' rights group, MIRA, held like a big rally on the state's Capitol saying that victims of domestic violence were going to be thrown out on the street, and all kinds of people were going to be tossed out of public housing on their ear, and children would be left homeless because of this policy. And my understanding is that even some members of the Republican caucus began to get cold feet about it. So I took the time to write up a 2-page fact sheet for distribution to them. And I was told that there was going to be a vote at some point this week, but apparently it may be taking place tonight on what the truth is about that. This is common sense. We're simply aligning our state policy with that of the federal government on who gets access to public housing. So, watch your news outlets tonight to find out if they voted on it and what the outcome was. And we'll have to get the list of people in the House and how they voted, whether they, think it's better to allow illegal aliens access to scarce benefits that are, when we have seniors and vets and disabled folks who are not. This, again, is a policy that could be enacted by the governor himself, if he chose. So depending on what the outcome of this vote is, I think will be, give us some ideas on how to move forward with this idea. But this really should be one of the top issues that the legislature is dealing with. We're faced with a budget crisis. We're faced with the prospect of more and more people coming here legally and being granted quasi-legal status by the president. This is unsustainable. So I will try to keep you all posted through the Northborough Tea Party and first immigration reform, and hopefully the news media will be following this as well. But that's, if we have that much trouble talking about what is a common sense issue, unless citizens and voters start communicating with the legislature, they're just going to crawl under a rock and not, want to take on this issue. Because there will be protests, unfair maligning of the proposals from the immigrants' rights groups, and that, we just have to deal with. But if the voters have a chance to find out what's going on and register their opinions with lawmakers, then we can make a difference. So let's move on to trade agreements. And afterwards, I'll take questions on any of these topics. But I wanted to spend some time on the trade agreements because it is something that.
Should we show the video now?
Yes. I just wanted to
Okay.
by way of introduction, talk about this. How many of you have heard about the language is a free trade agreement with 12 nations, including the United States, to liberalize trade. That's the stated goal. And the other is what's known as fast track authority or trade promotion authority, which is a mechanism that we've had in the past that it has enabled the executive branch to negotiate a free trade agreement and then bring it to Congress for either an up or down vote. And then, Congress can't change it, can't amend it. This is how we got NAFTA and a few other things. And so it's important, I think, to keep in mind in this discussion that the issue is not, is free trade a good thing? The issue is the process and what our leaders are putting on the table in terms of commitments to other countries. So one fellow who has done that, Dick Morris, who's a political consultant, I think he calls himself a Republican, but I know that he was a consultant to the Clinton administration also, so I think it's kind of bipartisan, produced a really excellent explanation of what the problem is with the proposal that the president is pushing. So let's roll it, and then I'll ask some.
This proposed trade deal isn't a backdoor to amnesty. Dick Morris has taken a closer look at this, and he'll talk about that next here on America's Forum.
This is huge, and I hope that everybody listening takes action. Call your senator about it. If he's a Republican, he's voting wrong. I don't think that people understand that in this deal, which is a trade agreement among Australia, Malaysia, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, Canada, United States, Mexico, Peru, and Chile, there is a provision for free flow of workers, just like in the European Union. What that means is unrestricted immigration. It means literally that Congress would not have the authority to restrict immigration because a treaty supersedes a statute under our Constitution. In Power Grab, the book you were talking about, we warn that Obama is going to try to circumvent the legislative process and use the treaty-making authority to do stuff that Congress can't repeal and a future president can't change. And as he enters the 7th year of his presidency, that's what he's focused on. This deal, under the guise of a trade agreement, saying, oh, it's another NAFTA. Well, the left opposes NAFTA, but I supported it, and I still do. But the point is that under the guise of NAFTA, it's providing for unrestricted immigration within these 11 countries, which means any Mexican can come to the United States legally, stay here, be naturalized, become a citizen, and vote.
So this becomes the stealth approach to amnesty. This
Not
is
just amnesty.
but-
Amnesty is for people that are already here. This says, come on in. This says that anybody in Mexico can move to the United States anytime that he wants. And the Congress can't do anything about it. The Constitution enumerates the powers of Congress. One of them is immigration and naturalization. This supersedes that, and it does so for all time, because you can't repeal a treaty unless the other 10 signatories agree. And it's even more important than that. I'll get to this in another segment later on. It also could become the way to get climate change in. He's taking the whole legislative agenda and putting it in a treaty, getting it ratified, and then it becomes as good as a constitutional amendment.
So yeah, it's an all-purpose constitutional amendment, really like a trash compactor for the Constitution.
It all goes back to what the Europeans did in the European Union. They couldn't pass it in any country, the new Constitution. So what they did is they signed a treaty, and they put the whole thing in a treaty, and treaty-making powers are far more executive. And in this case, Obama's putting it in a treaty and asking Congress to approve fast-track authority. The idea that with all the power this president has grabbed, the Republicans are about to give him fast track, which means he can do any trade agreement he wants and ratification is almost automatic. And the Democrats are opposing this. It is entirely Republican votes that are pushing it, and they just don't understand what's in the damn bill.
So the bottom line on this whole situation is Republican legislators, members of the House, members of the Senate especially, better take a closer look at this deal. And you're saying everybody within the sound of our voices needs to pick up the phone and call Washington right now.
And particularly if you have a Republican senator, call him and say, I'm a Republican, and I oppose the Pacific Trade Deal and the Fast Track Authority because immigration is in it.
And the immigration would be unlimited. It would supersede the
It would
Constitution.
take away Congress's power to limit immigration and vest it in a treaty that we can't alter instead.
The cynical part of me sees members of the Washington establishment on the Republican side saying, here's a way to clear the decks on immigration
No,
via
because
stealth.
they know that all those people will vote against them. They just don't know it's in there. And what Obama's doing, and we predicted this in Telegram, is he's taking his entire agenda and putting it in a treaty. And then, on top of that, putting in Fast Track. Fast Track says you can't amend the treaty. You have to vote it up or down in 60 days.
So the bottom line is, let them feel the heat and hopefully they'll see the light.
Yeah. And it's so hard to talk about because everyone thinks this is about Japanese automobiles or, U.S. banks getting more market share overseas or, selling American products overseas. Trade, it's something that, is a basic tenet of economics, that more trade makes us all better off. But that's the problem, is these treaties aren't about trade alone, or they're about trade that is defined differently from the way most of us would define it. And the key here is movement of natural persons, or what they call trade in services. So, to you and I, or to you and me, trade might be, trade in services might be a bank, opening up branches in Mexico, and Japan, and Malaysia. But when a U.S. bank goes over to another country, it doesn't bring all of the workers from the United States. It's not as disruptive in terms of the employment market in other countries. What most of these other countries are talking about when they talk about trade in services is bringing people over here to do jobs that Americans are currently doing. And they're talking not just about computer programmers or IT workers, they're talking about nurses, teachers, accountants, pretty much anything can be defined as a service. Immigration researchers, when you name your job, it can be done by someone else and be called a service. Even in manufacturing, you can provide labor as a service. Farm workers are a service. Construction workers can be considered a service, and that's trade. And so we've been through this about 10 years ago when we U.S. negotiated trade agreements with Chile and Australia and a few other countries, Korea. And they tried to, the process is Byzantine. It's also secret. And they make offers, the countries that are negotiating these agreements make offers to one another. And that offer is a commitment to something. So what the United States, U.S. Trade Representative does is, in our case now it's a he, goes and his negotiators say, okay, here's our offer. We're going to offer X number of slots for guest workers to enter every year. And that becomes the law. And as Dick Morris said, it can't be changed by Congress. It's not set according to our national interest. It's set according to what was negotiated with the other countries. And if there are big U.S. banks or U.S. corporations or multinational corporations in the U.S. who are pushing the U.S. Trade Representative to get something for them, what they always end up offering is entry visas to the United States in return for whatever some company wants in that other company. So Congress has gotten wise to this. 10 years ago, they got wise to it and said, we're not, they actually passed a resolution and said, you, the president, may not include immigration provisions in trade agreements. So that worked for a while, for about 10 years. They had a hearing on the Senate side, and Senator Chuck Grassley questioned the U.S. trade rep, or a member of the administration, I forget exactly which cabinet official it was, and said, are there any immigration agreements or any immigration provisions in this trade TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that you're negotiating with 12 other countries? And, you think it would be on a website somewhere, but it's not, it's all secret. So the answer given was, we make no changes to immigration policy in our negotiations or in our offers. It's a typical Obama administration answer to a question. What that means is, what it would be doing is setting into concrete the laws that we have now and blocking and the ability of Congress to ever change that. So right now, we accept 600,000 guest workers every year. Just last year, we admitted more than 300,000 professional guest workers every year. And even if they limit it to the professional guest workers, I'm talking about, if you're familiar with the H-1B program and the L-1 visa program, which are for people with a college degree. They're not the best and the brightest in the world coming to work here. They're ordinary workers. There's currently a lawsuit, it's a scandalous case out of California. The main California utility, Southern California Edison, just fired 500 of its IT staff and made them train their replacements who were coming in on H-1B visas mostly from India and making less money. And they had to train them or they lost their severance pay.
Oh my God.
And they had to sign non-disclosure agreements forbidding them from talking to the media about their experience. A lot of them, courageous ones, started writing to members of Congress and told them about it. But, this is, I mean, I don't know, I think most of us probably know somebody who works for a utility. That's not a job Americans won't do. But it's a job that they can get somebody in the world to do cheaper. And it's a race to the bottom. So if we make no change to our guest worker laws, what that means is we're stuck with the dysfunctional guest worker laws that we had forever, and it's a one-way street that you can never get off of. If there is, and if you try to change your law, Congress would say, well, we're Congress, we're going to pass a law, we want to make it, fewer than 300,000, we think, maybe it should be 200,000 from now on. If Congress changed it, we would promptly, and other countries have tried this before in other scenarios, we would be sued as having breached our treaty obligations. And guess who decides? It's an international tribunal of international trade experts who decide whether the United States Congress did something that will harm another treaty member. They decide. How many people think that we would win? It's already been done and we've lost. Under NAFTA, for example, many U.S. states had rules for nurses on the book that have to be fluent in English to work as a nurse in a U.S. hospital. The Canadians sued us over that and said that that was a breach of NAFTA because we wouldn't take French-speaking nurses to work in certain hospitals. And it finally ended up being negotiated. But this is the kind of stuff that ends up happening. I mean, it's not like we're rivals with Canada. I mean, if somebody feels that their business interests are harmed, then they can, call it an unfair trade action, and it goes to this international tribunal. So this political situation is most Democrats, because of the NAFTA experience, tend to be opposed to them. But it's not clear that the Democrats also tend to vote as a solid bloc. They have been doing that for years now. And so it's not clear yet that enough Democrats are going to, that there may be enough Democrats to stick with what the president is asking for and extract promises from the president about what's going to be in these agreements. And quite frankly, their concern is not about immigration, it's more about climate change provisions and labor provisions and all kinds of other stuff, not the immigration stuff. So if we can deal with them on all these other issues, which are important to them, then they could very well end up supporting this. So it's necessary for Republicans to understand what they would be signing up for. Now, frankly, I think the easiest argument with Republicans ought to be, are you really willing to give President Obama a free hand in negotiating anything whatsoever? But apparently they are willing to. And I think a lot of this is coming from Republican leadership of like, we need to show we can govern and be bipartisan and all this stuff. There are core groups of Republicans in the House and Senate that understand what Dick Morris just said, and they get it, and they've been talking to their colleagues about it, but it's not, it really is unclear now what is going to happen. So we here in the Commonwealth have an opportunity. We've got a delegation that should be opposed to this deal on all kinds of grounds, and probably will be. John was telling me that he's reached out to both Senator Warren's and Senator Markey's offices, and they have both indicated, and also Mr. McGovern, and they have all said, no, we're not in favor of it. But I think they need to be reinforced and hear from people, and this is an opportunity for us to do some outreach to members of Congress that are usually hopeless on immigration, but could to encourage them to stick with their instincts and be against this. I would like to think Mr. Lynch would be completely against this because the labor unions hate these agreements. Sometimes for the wrong reasons, but we need a coalition of people. So, and Mr. Lynch is very tight with unions. Now would be the time to start making phone calls. And for those of you that are also looking for other people to call to make a difference, certain Republicans in the House, the ones who have been good on immigration issues, would be the ones to target to make sure that they understand to vote against giving the president these, unlimited authority to negotiate whatever he wants. And second, the details of the there just should not be any immigration offers in trade agreements whatsoever. It's not necessary, and it's harmful to Americans who, deserve these opportunities. So let me just check my notes here and see if I'm missing anything. Certainly, India is not part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's a good reason for that, too. India has been agitating in international trade forums for the last 10 years, complaining about the United States that we don't let enough of the trade and services in, which is their body shops coming in to work in jobs. And yet India is one of the most protectionist countries on the planet. Absolutely. So that's why they're not part of this they're watching it very closely because they know that that this deal is expandable, and the other big player out there that's not a part of this deal is China. Malaysia and Mexico are worrisome enough in terms of people being able to come here to work in unlimited numbers. My understanding is that there are only 15 Democrats in the Senate that are for it. So just in the Senate, the Republicans can't lose more than 10 people. So basically all we need is for at least 10 or an equal number of Republicans to defect from what McConnell is trying to push through. And you'd be surprised, Jeff Sessions, of course, is leading the charge. Lindsey Graham is against it because he cannot afford, as being from South Carolina, people in South Carolina are so opposed to these things for, again, a multitude of reasons. Senators from North Carolina are against it. But we need to get at least 10 to 12 Senate Republicans to vote against it, and the whole deal's off. In the House, you know, it's gonna, again, it's gonna be close. So they need to hear your roar. Now's the time. Start with the Massachusetts delegation, and I've got some publications that I could forward to have put up on the AFIR.org website if people need some background reading on this, but I think that the video is a good explanation of what the deal is. And now what I'd like to do is give you all a chance to talk. So, Linda.
In the movie, in the film, he only mentions Mexicans, but doesn't this go along with all, what did you say, 11 countries?
It's 11 other countries. The most significant for us in terms of immigration would be Mexico, and also Malaysia. We don't currently have a lot of immigration from Malaysia, but that's how it starts. There actually are a significant number of H-1Bs already coming from Malaysia, and it's a populous country. That's how the chain migration flows start, is when we open up a program like this. Vietnam, I think, is also a big concern. They're one of the countries. China, I mean, we don't, Japan and Australia probably not going to get huge numbers. We already have a trade agreement with Chile. They're a part of it. But there's just no need for any immigration provisions. We're happy to trade, sell goods there. But, it's just unnecessary. Yes, ma'am.
Jessica, when you put information up on the website, would you be willing to give us the names of some of these senators and congressmen that we should target from one side or the other? I presume that when we talk to Democrats, we may urge them to vote against this for one reason that's slightly different from the reason we're going to have Republicans vote against it. Is that right?
It can be. So I think the issue of unlimited immigration and the impact on the American jobs market ought to be good for everybody.
Okay.
But sometimes, it doesn't work with everyone. But theoretically, I think that's worth mentioning to everyone. But you're right. Democrats are not concerned with giving fast-track authority to the president because they think they're willing to trust. Republicans aren't. So, but with the Democrats, it's just trade agreements. That's pretty much been a big issue. I have to say, what stopped the last episode of these trade agreements under the Bush administration was Nancy Pelosi's, when she took over the House of Representatives. It all stopped for a while. So, John.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Things have been in flux, as Jessica was saying, just last evening and the evening before that, things were happening. We had intended to have a series of action items for you tonight, but that was not possible based on what's going on. What I would like to suggest is that we put our heads together and, point to those things that are particularly timely and the highest and best use of our time, and provide talking points, names, etc. But we need to know who would like to participate at whatever level, whatever time you spend, they can call, write letters, whatever. We have everybody's name tonight, so we'll take it upon ourselves to put this package together and then email it to you within the next week or less, depending on what's happening.
I mean, I would say the action agenda is call your own member of Congress and the two senators at a minimum. I mean, that is something for sure that needs to happen. And, that's something easy. If you want to go beyond that, we can talk about other people to be targeted. Certainly, I think there needs to be a little bit more public discussion about this issue in general, because right now people are thinking it has to do with climate change or, child labor or something, that's why, and that just doesn't rise to the level of concern that open borders should, I think. Not that they're not important, those other issues are important, but and no fast traffic law. That's pretty much it. And ask them what their position is, because we need to, it's helpful for us all to know maybe who in the Massachusetts delegation is squishy on it. And tell each other so that other people can start calling them as well. Yes?
Does Congress know that there's this immigration provision in there?
No, they don't. A lot of them, some people do.
Because if the Democrats were to find out, wouldn't they all of a sudden be for it? Because they'll do anything the president wants as far as immigration?
Get more votes with the Democratic Party.
And that's why I think it's important to not just trust that they'll be opposed on the grounds of climate change and child labor and things like that. It's important, I believe, to engage the Democrats on the fact that we're not creating enough jobs for Americans, certainly not enough for Americans and legal immigrants, and that this is one of the main things that will keep American wages and opportunities low for decades to come. And if they're concerned about income inequality and how much the level of wages, this is not going to help. But I think they believe that when the U.S. trade rep says things like we're not changing immigration law, that's not the whole story. Right? It means we can never change immigration law again. And I think that would start to resonate. So they're aware that this issue is out there, that the trade agreement issue is there, but they're not aware of the implications of it, and they're certainly not aware of how voters feel about it, of how opposed people would
Because I would be afraid that, how they're always talking in certain sections like cities and stuff, that people with green cards should be able to vote. I mean, that would be, big probably for this because it gives them votes out there.
They might, that line of thought is definitely out there, and I think that's why some Democrats may support it. But they have a big problem in that organized labor has taken a stance against it, and they need that support also. This is one of the few immigration-related issues in which organized American labor actually is taking a principled stand on behalf of the interests of American workers, which they don't usually do with immigration, but I don't have an explanation as to why. Maybe they do get how big it is, but this is, we have that on our side. So, let me just go to the other side of the room and then I'll come back.
Yeah, I don't particularly understand this movement of natural persons phrase. Do these immigrants have to come over with a company, or is it, when you say mass immigration, it sounds like it's different type of immigration than when people walk in over the border. Are they going to use this as an argument saying it's not really mass immigration?
They will say that they will come on visas, or they will be coming for employment opportunities, and if they're not working, then the government will deport them, right? Just like the Obama administration has record deportations. They try to say that we're not changing immigration law, but that's very misleading because the truth is that nobody will be. Any move by Congress in the future to tighten up immigration would be seen as a trade barrier instead of an immigration law. That's what India has been trying, as I said, for years. I mean, it sounds surreal to talk about in those terms, but believe me, I've talked to enough people who are involved in this. I remember distinctly having a conversation with one of the trade negotiators who did the Chile treaty about a decade ago, and him insisting that this treaty had nothing to do with immigration. I said, but there are people coming to work
stay
still
here,
in the
like,
border.
But yeah, oh, absolutely.
not like H-1 visas, they have to go back.
Well, under the law now, our dysfunctional immigration law, people with H-1B visas can stay until they get a green card, if they have an employer who wants them. And under the rules of these trade agreements, if a company just decided it wanted to do all its hiring, it wanted to recruit overseas, they would have the freedom of movement just like the European Union has. So one country who signed on to the treaty, their immigration laws don't mean anything anymore because they're coming, it's free movement of, it's natural, free movement of persons. It's trade in services. So your labor is a service. That's how they see it. It's a factor of production.
Does this also prevent us from sailing the water?
It would prevent us from blocking a lot of the movement of people from the 12 countries. Now, one of the differences between NAFTA and this agreement is that in NAFTA, the negotiators actually made a list of all the jobs that people from Canada and Mexico could come to the United States to do. And the only workers who were let in were people who were in those particular jobs. And it's a relatively narrow list of types of jobs. This is why we haven't had the whole country of Mexico move here already under NAFTA, because it was limited. But the offers since then in trade agreements do not specify occupations or even always visa categories. It's very, very open-ended. That's the problem. And once it's signed and once it's done, it's done. Yes?
Jessica, I'm concerned on the issue of transparency, or apparently the lack thereof. I think it's ridiculous to allow any Congress person to sign something they haven't read. And when not there be a movement to that direction, can't we, as people who are doing these folks in office, insist, at least by phone calls, if no other way, that there be transparency before the bill is even considered?
That would be logical. I think that's a very common sense approach. And that is one of the huge problems, is that nobody really knows what's in the agreement. There are people who've seen leaks from other countries, and so that's how we have an idea of what's in it. What has been proposed, I think it's in the Senate now, is something that would mandate that the trade agreements be posted on a website for the public to see. I think it's 90 days before a vote, and Congress gets, or maybe it's 60 days for the public, 90 days for lawmakers to read. That would help, but I personally do not have the level of trust members of Congress that even if they had the chance to read it, that they would.
Yeah, like the public was promised 5 days to look over the Affordable Care Act, and they did it overnight.
Yeah.
And that it's still, I mean, ultimately, the first thing is that there should be, Congress needs the right to amend whatever the executive negotiates. That's the first principle. Because if Congress gives that up, they might as well go home. I mean, what are they there for? So it's this, constitutional separation of powers question that's very important too. And simply knowing what's in it, they would still have to vote either up or down. And I don't think that, I just don't have confidence that they would exercise their authority unless they have the ability to make amendments. And the president doesn't like that because, yeah, well, and he says, how can we negotiate, how can I go in there and make offers and promise things if the Congress is just going to change it? I understand that, but, and that's when, we can also come back to this issue of then you need to promise that there are going to be no immigration things in the trade agreement whatsoever, and they won't promise that. That's the like the administration itself is not a trustworthy entity.
But if they're not calling this immigration, then Congress isn't gonna call it immigration.
Right, it's just like the executive action wasn't amnesty, it's prosecutorial discretion. They have a way of trying to just redefine it. Yes.
Well, if this is all done in secret, then how could Congress even know what's in it to vote on it if it's all supposed to be done secret?
Well, the idea is that they would announce it, and like what the president wants to happen is that he just gets to announce it and say, okay, up or down, and don't dare vote this down, because, you know, we've seen this. Right. Like with the Iran agreement and everything else. The problem with the secrecy is that nobody has a chance to find out what's inside the work. He knows that, and that's
That's what he wants.
Exactly.
They really
So
know
it's,
that
you know,
they
it
really-
really is several things. You know, transparency is an argument in and of itself, but again, you come back to, okay, what's in it? They wouldn't have a problem negotiating a free trade agreement if it was just about free trade. We need to educate people that it is not just transparency, it's not just constitutional separation of powers, it is the substance of what is in the trade agreement also, and that's bad. The immigration provisions just, that, you know, should not be on the table. Yes?
I saw that Rand Paul is in favor of this. It was on the screen. Do you know if any of the other Republican potential or nominees have spoken about this?
My understanding is that Scott Walker is against it. Ted Cruz is for it.
Oh, I can't believe that.
He's always been he's always avoided the issue of legal immigration, or if he hasn't avoided it, he's been in favor of more guest worker visas and such. He's been very good on legal immigration. He's also educatable. I'm not sure about Rand Paul. I would think that as a libertarian, he would be reflexively in favor of free trade, and that's a reasonable position for a libertarian until they, you know, they have to understand it's just about that.
We have time for a couple more, and then we're going to miss it.
Could we get these announcements in first?
Sure.
And then we have more questions. I don't want to stop the questions, but
So you'd be willing to stay over?
Absolutely.
the podium's not over. It's just that we had some announcements on it.
Okay, Ralph, you first.
Sure.
I think most of you know me by now. Maybe that's good, maybe it isn't. Tomorrow night, I will be hosting a meeting at the Embassy Suites, usually our last Wednesday of the month. We're going to bring in Catherine White. Most people know who Catherine White is. Yes, no?
Yeah.
She's going to be talking about Article 5, the Convention of Constitutional Changes. And she's going to tell us a little bit as to why that would be a disaster or a risk. And it would also be quite the gamble. So we don't know what either side would do if we start introducing different amendments to the Constitution. It's going to be either reinforce it or re-amend it. So I'm for enforcing it. I don't know about the rest of you. Catherine, she's a Massachusetts native, and a graduate of Massachusetts Institute of Technology. After a number of years as an engineer, she switched tracks, and she does her own accounting business since 1997. She spoke at many tax day rallies, various civic and political groups, and filed panels discussing the Constitution with Pacific Rim countries and for the State Department. So I think it would be, we're going to have that at the Embassy Suites tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. That's on Route 20 in Marlborough. For those who are interested, I'd love to have you. Another interesting announcement, I just got this off the printer before I showed up here today. How many people know of Rabbi Jonathan Halpern? No. Oh, a good chunk of you. Guess who's coming back on May 12th? Dennis Michael Lynch. He, as Jessica spoke very well tonight, is also part of the illegal immigration issue and how it is impacting us as a country. That is May 12th at the Torah congregation. That is in Stoughton, Massachusetts. That's at 7:30. Suggested donations $15 for a free registration and $20 payable at the door. If you haven't seen Dennis Michael Lynch in action, he's awesome. Okay. We have, last year was it, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to. And he's unbelievable. So if you haven't seen him in person, you may have seen him on TV, on some of the news stations, Fox, CNN, and so forth. But he's something to see. So if anybody needs any information, just see me afterwards. There's another one on May 18th. It's a topic called From Austria to Israel. We're going to have a couple of speakers there. It's about the worldwide assault on Christians and Jews. So that's at May 18th, same time, same place, same pre-registration. It's a couple of people, Elizabeth Savage-Wolf. She's an Austrian human rights and anti-Sharia activist. She's going to cover also new Australian law on Islam and why this law is relevant to the United States. Also along with that is a gal by the name of Renee Adi. She's an Assyrian-born Iraqi and raised in Syria. As we've heard from Brigitte Gabrielle, she also has a story to talk about. Her family had to flee Syria and managed to immigrate into Austria under the Geneva Convention Refugee Act. So that would be kind of an interesting discussion as well. I don't think Ray Haynes here tonight, so I know he was invited, but he had passed this along and so forth. So those are two real good events. I just wanted to share that quickly with you tonight. And if you get a chance, by all means, please do so. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks, Al.
There is anybody else right away? I just wanted to mention that there is a petition in here in the back for Governor Baker to stop Common Core. And that's something that those of you who are familiar with Common Core, how many understand Common Core? We want to get the governor to stop this. And if you'll help us, there's a petition you can sign. See Barbara O'Mara in the back, and she's got a copy of it. Thank you. Are there other announcements?
No, I think that's it. Thanks.
Well, then we can, people are free to leave. Wait, no, you can't leave yet. Got 9 more minutes. Sorry. So we got more questions and learn a little bit more.
I want to respect people's time, but, so by all means, if you have to go, please do. But if there are some more questions, I'm happy to take them. Yes?
Recently, hearing about the difference between a presidential treaty and a presidential agreement. And that's mostly in the discussion regarding Iran. That's only one country. That's an agreement, presidential agreement going on between our country and Iran. Is the trade agreement more complex because there are more than 2 nations involved, which causes the binding nature of the United States, because it's more than 2 nations? Because if it's only an agreement, the next president can change it. If it's considered a treaty, which it should be considered a treaty, we're going to agree not to have any nuclear weapons in Iran. If we agree that it's a treaty, then the Congress has to approve it the Senate has to approve it by 3/4. So Congress agrees to it. Well, that's Congress agreeing to it, isn't it? That's like the treaty.
It's a treaty
It is
that
a
would
treaty.
go beyond the next.
Okay,
I mean, it would be
but
enforced until.
Congress then has to approve it.
Yes,
I mean,
well,
the
the
Senate
Senate,
has to approve it.
but once it does, and it's done,
Yeah, I get it.
we would potentially be subject to sanctions if we did something that an
Now I
international
understand why.
tribunal
I
decided was against the
Yeah.
treaty.
Jessica, what's the timing on this resistance? I mean, when do they, is there a deadline, and when should we have to mass our forces?
Good question. I think the president would have liked to have had the fast track authority yesterday, if not sooner, but he's running into opposition from his own party. And now there's talk in the Senate of trying to pass some conditions on getting to fast track authority. But I really believe that this whole thing is going to be way harder for him to get than he expected. And I would like to think that it can be stopped. That if Congress puts the brakes on it and says, no fast track authority, we're willing to take a look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership without immigration provisions. And this is what we were able to do with the Chile and the Singapore agreements, and one with Australia as well. Is, you know, they weren't fast tracked, and the immigration provisions had to go. There were still a few narrow guest worker provisions, which are immigration provisions, but they were very small numbers. Like in one country, it was like 5,000 as a cap, because the George Bush administration at the time said, we're doing some guest work. Like, you know, they were hell-bent on getting something in there because they had promised it to these other countries. So they felt that, it was like a matter of honor that they had to offer some kind of concession on immigration. But I think we can really limit it. The thing this is what's happening. Many of you have heard of the World Trade Organization? They've been trying to get a huge group of nations to sign these common principles with promises on freer movement of people for a long, long time now, at least 10 years. And they haven't been able to do it because there are really, I believe, just too many competing interests and too many moving parts of all these different industries, whether it's financial services or manufacturing or agriculture. And when it comes right down to it, very few countries are actually willing to relinquish their sovereignty in many ways. The European Union is really an exception to this. And we see how well that's working out these days. So when the rubber hits the road, it seems to always be the United States that's like bending over backwards and trying to get everyone to sign on to it. We're willing to give up whatever it takes for those huge, multinational corporations, many of whom are based in the United States, who lobby for this stuff. But I've seen it happen before. The whole thing is a house of cards. And it doesn't take much to kick out a couple of those cards, and the whole thing comes crashing down. So that's what all we need to do is get enough Democrats to balk and enough Republicans to balk, and the whole thing is over for the years. And then they'll come back, the U.S. Trade Representative will come back with a much more narrowly focused thing on either few industries or just, that's really just about trading goods or maybe financial, something that's okay, that's something we can all support, because we're not, it's so hard for me to talk to conservatives about this sometimes, because it's not that trade is bad, it's that the agreements that they try to pass off as trade are flawed, and we cannot give up our sovereignty. So I think, the whole thing will collapse if we can just kick out a few cards.
Who is it that does the infighting in our behalf there in Washington?
On our behalf or on our country's
In our
behalf?
country's
Well, then, yeah, they're the same thing, right? So we're fighting for what's in the national interest.
The politicians don't understand it until somebody kicks them and makes sure they understand who the kickers are.
Members of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Jeff Sessions from Alabama has written a Dear fellow senators, telling them about the immigration provisions and the meaning of it. Elizabeth Warren, our own senator, has been doing the same kind of thing on the Democratic side. In the House, John Boehner is all for this. But again, there are, I think that the Republicans can be rallied in the House. I don't think they're educated enough about it yet, but there are some who've lived through this before, like Representative Lamar Smith is one who scuttled some of the previous ones from the House Judiciary Committee. Paul Ryan is all for it. He's pushing it from the House side. It's all that Ways and Means group, that are usually great on tax issues and things like that, but they have a blind spot when it comes to these trade agreements. I think that the thing now is to just keep slowing it down. It's run into obstacles, and that's a good thing. The fact that it hasn't been voted on yet is a good thing, and we have time to educate everyone. But it needs to start now. I think that the phone calls and all can start right now, because they've gotten through Loretta Lynch. They're going to get through the trafficking bill. They're going to start working on the budget, but they're going to want to, unless members start to feel some heat, they're going to think it's okay to go forward with this. Yes.
If it's a treaty, it only has to be voted by the Senate. The House, doesn't matter what the House believes, right?
But if they want to pass a bill that limits, well, for fast track, fast track authority has to go through vote.
Okay.
The treaty itself would only be the Senate.
Right.
And this bill that would provide more transparency would have to be both chambers.
But shouldn't we, since it's a vote on the treaty is the most important thing, shouldn't we be focused on the Senate?
Well, the fast track authority would come first, because that gives the president the authority to finish the negotiations and then present Congress with a fait accompli.
Okay.
So right now the fight is over fast track, but it's really like a proxy fight for the whole thing.
I see.
Anybody who has a yes?
Is it my imagination, or for almost 7 years, Harry Reid just put every bill in a bucket somewhere and left it there?
Right.
Yeah.
Why is it not possible? Why is it not possible for McConnell? That's a key person. He doesn't have to bring it up. So if in fact we concentrate everything on McConnell, the bill doesn't even get voted on or in danger of being passed. Is that, am I mistaken anywhere?
You're right that McConnell holds, is a key here. I believe that, McConnell always plays his cards very close to his chest and doesn't let on what he's thinking until he sees which way the wind is blowing. I believe that he would like to pass this.
How about Boehner?
But the thing about
The brain of the young.
Boehner definitely has to pass it. The thing about McConnell is it's all going to depend on how many Republicans defect. And it's not the usual suspects either who always object to the immigration bill. Like the people who objected to gang of 8. Lindsey Graham lined up with Jeff Sessions. That's news. You don't see that ever. So I think they are going to be able to peel off a lot of Republicans. It just remains to be seen. You need enough. We can't trust the Democrats to stick to their principles. They need to feel some voice of the voters. Yes.
The workers that are coming over under this thing, other workers have specified length of time they can stay here. Does each worker set that for any provision that says if you're coming over in this free trade thing that you can only have 2 years?
Well, we don't know, because that kind of level of detail is still secret.
Still hidden?
Secret, yes. I'm sure they talked about it, but nobody knows yet what Obama's trade representative has promised.
What am I from Washington to anything?
They don't listen.
You get them on the phone.
At this point, not yet. It doesn't come to that. John?
Just as you said at the outset, the Constitution states that immigration and naturalization is a purview of the Congress. It's illegal. Isn't it illegal if they go ahead and put immigration in here? It seems to me you have a legal argument if you're following the Constitution.
Yes, but if Congress ratifies that treaty, then it's,
And they're not calling it immigration.
but, well, the Senate, if the Senate ratifies a treaty that the President has negotiated, then it's, that trumps U.S. law.
Well, I know treaty.
Or at least, it's hard to say that, it might be possible, let me put it this way. Congress could try to change our law, if, let's say this trade agreement passes, and I'm talking about the actual agreement, not the fast track copy, but whatever, let's say the Trans-Pacific Partnership comes into effect, and it allows, let's say, 500,000 guest workers from Mexico, or whatever, some arbitrary limit that they've negotiated. And then 5 years down the road, Congress said, that was really too high. We want to do it. Or the other areas are, what the requirements are for employers to demonstrate before they bring in guest workers. All the regulations are part of the agreement. If Congress goes to change them, I can't say that Congress wouldn't be able to. It's possible that Congress could change the law, and none of the other 12 countries would object. But what are the chances of that? I mean, we know from past experience with Canada and with India in particular that they argue that we are blocking access to their ability to provide free trade in services through Congress changing immigration laws. So it's a hypothetical, but I think we all know how this would come out. If Congress changed the laws and took, reneged on some of the promises that the administration made in negotiating that treaty and said, okay, we're going to go from 100,000 to 50,000 because of high unemployment in the U.S., there would be a trade dispute, and we would be taken to an international tribunal. And, I can't say 100% certainty that, it wouldn't go our way. But if I were a betting woman, I would definitely bet that we would lose. Because most of the time, I did a paper on this a while back, and I had some statistics on how many times the U.S. was ever successful in World Trade Organization disputes. It was rare.
So the only way a treaty can be overturned is if the signature is all agreed. So that's why if you get 10, 12, 15 countries, it's almost impossible.
Who really thinks that Mexico would be willing to give up access to its workers, for its workers to come to the U.S.? This is their safety valves, these are their remittances, it's just, and like the treaty doesn't, nobody's ever going to say, oh, Mexico would, would negotiate. We know that that's not how, that's not.
I mean, it's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. How did Mexico get
Yeah,
there?
right. Well, they're on the Pacific too. Yeah, Chile.
How about getting the labor unions involved with
Richard
this?
Trump is against this, by the way. I saw him on
Labor unions
CNN.
are against
I mean, that's.
Yeah, but big time, getting them to get out and speak.
Oh, they're out there.
He's tough.
Well, that's a good point. Are there other pieces of this treaty that we haven't talked about tonight that have constituencies that would support our side of it?
I think there are other constituencies on other issues that are opposed to the treaty. And again, it's environmentalists and people who tend to be against like child labor, want those kinds of connections. There's a whole range of issues that it touches on. The problem is their opposition will melt away if their concerns are met by the president. So, and my position as an immigration expert is like, I'm not going to take a position on the climate change aspects of this treaty because I'm not an expert in that. If they say there's no immigration provisions in this, professionally, then I'm not going to talk. Personally, I might care for other reasons as a voter, but chances of them being able to be clever enough to resolve everyone's oppositions are pretty slim. But again, we can't count on it. We have to advocate.
So there's no sense of cooperate with one of the just go ahead.
I think that's okay. I think it's a good way to make common cause. I think it's a great opportunity to reach out, as I said, to our congressional delegation, because they're not hopeless on this, and just establish relationships with staffers that we haven't reached out to before. And I think it is, I mean, if, I don't have any suggestions for other groups, like if I don't know which environmental groups in particular are working on this. I know the labor unions are. But absolutely, I mean, if for those of you who are involved in other organizations, this is a good overlap.
So really, what's to keep any of us from losing our job to this? Because, say, I'm a teacher, and if they decide, well, we can get all these guest teachers in for half the salary, we're all gone too. I mean, it's all of us. Every single American that has a job, our job is now in jeopardy.
The potential, without trying to sound too apocalyptic, the potential is there over the long run for any of us, pretty much, to be competing in a global labor market. Or at least one, defined by the 12 nations, just like the European Union is right now, where there is free movement of people within that treaty area. And, do I think that this would transform our communities overnight? No, not even in 5 years, but 10 years? 20 for sure.
It just gives up on national sovereignty and trashes the Constitution even more. And that's been Obama's goal his whole time, that he wants to fundamentally transform America and trash the Constitution. This one, Congress would just be giving him the authority to do that. And he thinks he's a dictator and acts like one, but could be an even bigger dictator. So it makes no sense for Congress to go along with this.
It doesn't, but again, it's been explained to them as if it's good for U.S. companies and, we're here, and I'm like, it's good for us, And again, and there are some occupations that would be immediately, and those would, especially the IT workers. It would not take long at all for